Would you describe Xi Jinping as a dictator?
Look, China's a one-party state. I don't think anyone would call it a democracy.
Why can't the Prime Minister of Canada publicly admit that Xi Jinping is a dictator? Maybe it's because the authority of the Prime Minister of Canada has been described as near dictatorial. Perhaps Justin Trudeau is a dictator hiding in plain sight. In this video, we'll cover how the Prime Minister in Canada may be wielding too much power and what that means for Canada. Many people don't realize how much power is concentrated in the Prime Minister's office. A study from 2007 covering 22 OECD countries found that Canadian Prime Ministers have more control than leaders in any other country. In fact, the Prime Minister of Canada exercises power and influence which would make many presidents jealous. But that power is making the Prime Minister more of a dictator rather than a public servant. Through his powers, he can elect or select judges, his aides, and can prorogue assembly whenever he feels opposition is about to call a vote of no confidence. As per the Constitution, Canada operates under a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy. The Prime Minister of Canada is the head of government and holds significant powers, but they are subject to constitutional and legal constraints. While the Canadian Prime Minister has considerable authority, the system is designed to prevent the concentration of power and ensure checks and balances. But to determine whether Prime Minister Trudeau exploited the system of checks and balances, let's examine the powers of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the head of the executive branch of government and is responsible for forming a cabinet, which includes ministers overseeing various government departments. He presides over cabinet meetings, sets the agenda, and has the authority to make final decisions on policy matters. Cabinet solidarity is a convention where all members publicly support the decisions made by the cabinet. Moreover, the Prime Minister is the chief executive of the country, responsible for the overall direction of government policies and administration. The Prime Minister also plays a key role in determining Canada's foreign policy. They represent the country on the international stage and have the authority to make decisions related to diplomacy and international relations. While the monarch is the formal commander-in-chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Prime Minister has practical control over the military and can make decisions related to defense and national security. On top of that, the Prime Minister exercises certain prerogative powers inherited from the British Crown. These powers include the appointment of senators, the dissolution of Parliament, and the granting of pardons. The Prime Minister also advises the monarch on the appointment of the Governor-General and can offer advice on other matters. However, this advice is typically given in accordance with constitutional conventions. While the constitutional documents outline these powers, in reality, Canadian prime ministers in the past, and including Justin Trudeau, appear to wield an excessive amount of authority, bordering on a dictatorial position. In comparison to other democracies, the Canadian Prime Minister holds an unusually high level of power with minimal checks on their authority. Oversight seems limited, extending to senators, Supreme Court judges, and even their superior, the Governor-General. Before entering civil service, the Prime Minister has the authority to appoint individuals ranging from the head of the RCMP, Canada's National Police Force, to the leader of the Canadian Museum of History without any form of supervision. The Prime Minister can prorogue Parliament at will, particularly when faced with opposition parties planning votes of no confidence, effectively shutting down parliamentary activities for up to a year. Moreover, the Prime Minister holds the authority to call elections at their own discretion. This means that if the Prime Minister senses a decrease in popularity, they have the ability to dissolve everything and seek a new 5-year mandate extending their time in office. This practice raises concerns about potential abuse of power, as it may be perceived as an unfair advantage that allows the Prime Minister to manipulate the democratic process to their advantage. This could undermine the democratic principles of fairness and equal representation, as it may not align with the will of the people and could be seen as an exploitation of the political system for personal or party gain. A significant weakness of a powerful premier is that absolute power may corrupt the incumbent. For example, the Prime Minister may appoint his cronies as senators. By 2010, the incumbent had appointed 33 senators, most of whom were drawn from his party. Adding to that, in the existing system, each party leader decides who in their party gets to speak and hands the speaker a list. This arrangement allows party leaders to silence dissenting voices by excluding certain members of the parliament. Another argument is how much control the Prime Minister has, especially in choosing which members of Parliament can speak during debates and question period. Right now, the Prime Minister can influence the Speaker of the House of Commons to pick members for these important parliamentary discussions. Plus, when the members ask questions, the Prime Minister gets to decide which cabinet minister gives the response. The main issue is the potential for the Prime Minister to misuse this power. Currently, each party leader decides which members of their party can speak and gives a list to the Speaker. This process can be twisted to favor those who agree with the party's goals, leaving out voices of dissent or those not in good favor with party leaders. But a powerful Prime Minister isn't always a problem. With control over the legislative branch, he can pass government bills swiftly, which could contribute to national development, particularly if these bills are crucial for the country. Considering the example of China, where the president holds absolute power, one could argue that in such a system there's a risk of prioritizing power over human rights, potentially leading to a surveillance state. On the positive side, a more centralized government in China allows for quick decision-making and law implementation. This efficiency has played a role in boosting Beijing's economy, as it facilitates the bureaucracy in executing laws and making business-friendly decisions promptly. However, it's crucial to keep in mind the saying, "Power corrupts," and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The concern is that when a head of state like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has extensive powers, there's a risk of succumbing to dictatorship and greed. This also comes at a time when Canada uses a first-past-the-post system instead of proportional representation, which further plays into the hands of a powerful dictator. The way a first-past-the-post system works is the candidate who receives the most votes in a constituency wins that seat. This means that if a candidate gets 40% of the vote, they win the seat, even if the other 60% of the votes are divided among other candidates. On the other hand, in proportional representation, the number of seats that a party gets in Parliament is proportional to the share of the popular vote that they get. This means that if a party gets 20% of the popular vote, they will get about 20% of the seats in Parliament. In the 2015 election, the Liberals, much like the Conservatives before them, secured around 39% of the vote. Thanks to the first-past-the-post system, this translated into 54% of the seats and absolute control. When all the power is centered on one party, it inevitably becomes concentrated in the hands of a single leader. This stands in stark contrast to proportional representation, which typically results in majority coalition governments. This essentially means in a proportional system, power is shared, a common practice in many Western democracies. Coalition governments ensure that ministers from different parties collaborate at the cabinet table, making decisions collectively. Such coalitions act as a safeguard against the concentration of power in the hands of a single party or individual, preventing it from being used solely for their own interests. Concentrating power solely with one leader, especially when surrounded by a few unelected individuals, can lead to disastrous consequences if a party's interests diverge from the public good. And because of these absolute powers, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been a disaster for the Canadian state, society, and the economy. The Prime Minister has made the country look like an authoritarian country, like Russia or China, where human rights are abused, where might is right, and where the state wants to do whatever they want. Some decisions made by the Prime Minister seem questionable, such as the use of the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act, a federal law in Canada, gives the government special powers to deal with emergencies. It can be put into effect by the Governor-General following the Prime Minister's advice if they believe there is a national emergency. Since its establishment in 1988, the Emergencies Act has been rarely used, with 4 instances including the recent 2022 activation in response to the Freedom Convoy protests. The Freedom Convoy protests originated in early 2022 in opposition to a vaccine mandate for truckers crossing the Canada-US border. However, the demonstrations expanded to address broader concerns, including opposition to COVID-19 restrictions and the government of Justin Trudeau. Initially peaceful, the protests turned disruptive, blocking border crossings and occupying downtown Ottawa. The decision to invoke the Emergencies Act received criticism, with some arguing it was unnecessary and disproportionate. Critics contended that the protest didn't pose a security threat to Canada and that negotiation and de-escalation could have been employed to resolve the situation. Another glaring example of Trudeau's extensive power is the carbon tax. tax. This tax, aimed at addressing environmental concerns, reflects Trudeau's ability to shape major policies without strong checks and balances. While environmental initiatives are crucial, imposing a carbon tax without thorough examination will have significant economic effects for individuals and businesses, worsening the financial burden on an already struggling populace. The carbon tax is adding an extra 4.4 cents per liter, squeezing the Canadian budget even more at a time when many Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. This arbitrary increase in carbon tax not only affects transportation costs, but also increases the price of food and energy with little to show for it. Similarly, Trudeau's approach to immigration illustrates the consequences of his unchecked powers. Making decisions on immigration policy without proper checks and balances is putting strain on public resources, creating job market issues and making life hell for the Canadians. Plus, the immigration issue is not only contributing to a rise in grocery prices and soaring housing costs, but is also putting strain on the health sector, causing it to become overwhelmed. In the absence of effective checks on Trudeau's expansive powers, there's an urgent need for mechanisms ensuring accountability and transparency. Without such safeguards, Canada risks continued policy consequences driven more by unchecked power than the welfare of its citizens, potentially putting democratic principles and citizens' rights in danger. If you like this video and want to learn more about Canada, check out this video here. And if this video brought value to you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video. Thanks for watching.